48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty spent decades reporting on crime stories. In her new podcast, she is continuing to explore everything from a 19th century murder trial to life inside a maximum security women's prison. And it's called My Life of Crime. And Erin is joining me now. And I said this to you, I'm so pumped. I have written to, your executive producer saying 48 Hours needs a podcast. And everyone who works here knows that, one of my catchphrases is, I was listening to a really good podcast. So I'm so happy that you're doing this. And what's great about this is, if you love 48 Hours, this is an offshoot. You're not going to get a repeat of it. You're going to get stuff that 48 Hours normally wouldn't do.
Absolutely. Because as you know, that sometimes you can take a microphone into places that you can't really take a camera.
So true.
So in places like prisons, people were far more willing to talk to us openly if all they saw was the mic.
Right.
And then also in one of the first two podcasts, I actually spend the night at the scene of a crime. I have never done that on 48 Hours.
And that scene of the crime has to do with the Lizzie Borden case. So you go back in time for the first one.
Exactly, but I realize that not everybody knows what that case is. I thought everyone did. And of course, this was one of the first high-profile cases, kind of the O.J. Simpson trial of the 19th century, if you will. A 32-year-old, very nice woman accused of hacking to death, there's no other way to put it, both her father and stepmother, broad daylight. What I didn't realize was how much I didn't know about the case, and that anyone who watches 48 Hours knows how important blood spatter is. So, in fact, if Lizzie Borden did do this and hit her dad, for instance, 11 times with an axe, there would be blood spatter. No blood spatter found on her, no blood trail. The trial itself is fascinating because in the 19th century, we women were not allowed to vote, so we couldn't serve on juries. And the fact that it was all male really played a very big part in the verdict. And in fact, people will be surprised by what the verdict was. I had no idea. The verdict is surprising. And then there's this great moment at trial. I mean, there's so many things about this case where the coroner, this would not happen today, I should point out, where the coroner shows up at trial, goes into a bag, pulls out the skulls of the victims.
Oh my gosh.
And then, of course, Lizzie, being the good church-going defendant as she was, immediately faints. And so this was the kind of trial that was going on almost 100 years ago.
And you stayed in the house?
I did stay in the house.
How creepy was that?
Because I could, because believe it or not, the crime scene is now a bed and breakfast.
I was going to say, if it's an Airbnb.
It is.
Oh my gosh.
With a sign that says no refunds for early departures. I slept, of course, in the room where Abby Borden was found dead because I was... Look, I've never interviewed a dead person, so I was like, maybe she'll show up. She did not. I was very disappointed. But, it's all this whole kind of thing that we can do on podcasts that you just really can't do.
So you mentioned also being able to take a microphone into a women's prison.
We did, and we went into Bedford Hills, which is the only maximum security prison for women in New York. And there's so many surprising things. Number one, because they really try to keep inmates, even really heinous killers, connected with their family. There is an amazing conjugal visit policy. So we met a woman who got married and spent 3 days of her honeymoon in a house separate, believe it or not.
Wow.
Allowed to watch television, do moonlight strolls on the grounds. Yeah, I was very surprised by that. There were a lot of surprising things in Bedford Hills.
So one of the things that I thought would always make for a good podcast for the 48 Hours correspondence, and I don't know if you're going to do this, is just to delve into some of the cases that you have covered. Because I feel like one of the questions I always have is, how did you get that interview? Or what was that person like in real life? And do you talk about that?
Well, we should do that. We do. But we also, here's one of the most interesting one to me was that I don't think people realize that when you're covering crime, day after day, year after year. You didn't have to say decades, but anyway, I've been doing it for a while. The impact it has on you and the impact it has on your family. And so one of our podcasts involves, I brought Richard Schlesinger in, one of my colleagues, and we interviewed kind of a lab rat, someone who grew up around this crime, who happens to be my kid. And both of us were surprised. Like when I would cover children who had been kidnapped and were missing, going home, his life would change. And the way he would deal with the fact that, and then I was guilty many times of coming home and talking about these crimes, which I shouldn't have. So that is something that we deal with too, which deals with really kind of the aftermath and what surrounds covering these cases, you know, year after year.
Well, it's fascinating. I cannot wait to indulge. Erin, thank you very much. I'm going to be binging. Thank you.
I hope.
So you can listen to Erin's podcast, My Life of Crime, anywhere you find your podcasts.